The old woman fed 3 homeless children, not knowing that decision would change her life years later. Smoke from the pot rose slowly, mixing with the smell of hearty soup and fresh rolls. Mrs. Eleanor's cart was humble, but spotless. An old metal stand, a faded canopy, a sizzling grill, and jars of ketchup and mustard lined up like little soldiers. All around was the noise of the city. Cars honking, hurried footsteps, a distant siren, and voices crossing paths without making eye contact. Mrs. Eleanor had working hands with tiny little burns and tired nails. She adjusted her stained apron and served a bowl to a customer who had known her for years. "God bless you, Mrs. E," the man said, leaving a few dollars. She barely smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was one of those smiles that doesn't last long because life doesn't give you a break. "Hope you enjoy it, son," she replied. When the customer left, Mrs. Eleanor looked at the little cash box. It wasn't full. It never was. And today, it seemed even lighter. Sales were down because of roadwork on the block diverting people, and some new food truck that had set up 2 streets away with flashier signs and gourmet options. Even so, Mrs. Eleanor kept going. She always kept going. It was close to 6 when the sun started to dip and the canopy's shadow grew longer. That's when she saw them. 3 kids. They weren't running like the others. They weren't speaking loudly. They were sticking close to each other as if the world was too big to walk through alone. All 3 had the same face. Dark eyes, sharp cheekbones, messy black hair. They looked like dusty mirrors. Their clothes were worn out, way too big, and their sneakers had lost their shape. They didn't have backpacks. They didn't have an adult. They just had hunger. Mrs. Eleanor looked at them once, without making a scene. She didn't clutch her chest. She didn't make a drama out of it. She just looked at them the way you look at something that hurts because it's real. The kids stood there, 2 meters from the cart, not daring to get any closer. One of them, the one in the middle, took a step forward and spoke softly. "Ma'am, do you have anything left over that you can't sell?" Mrs. Eleanor held the ladle in mid-air. She'd heard that phrase before, from other kids in other years, but there was something different about these ones. They weren't asking with a scheme. They were asking with shame. "Do you have a mom?" she asked, without accusing them. The 3 of them looked at each other like the question was a physical blow. "No," said the middle one, and his voice barely cracked. "We don't." Mrs. Eleanor swallowed hard and looked at the pot. She looked at the ready bowls, she looked at the little cash box, and then she looked at the 3 children again. The one on the right looked down. The one on the left pressed his lips together as if he was trying not to cry. Mrs. Eleanor took a deep breath and made a decision. It didn't feel heroic to her. It felt simple. "Come here," she said, motioning with her hand. "Come closer. I don't bite." The 3 of them approached slowly, as if they were afraid it was a trap. Mrs. Eleanor served them 3 small portions with what was left. They weren't full bowls like for an adult, but they were hot, and when you're hungry, warmth is a promise. The children sat on the plastic stools, right next to each other. They ate fast at first, anxiously, and then slower, as if their bodies finally realized that, yes, there was going to be food in their stomachs. Mrs. Eleanor watched them eat and felt a knot in her chest she couldn't explain. Maybe it was the memory of her own son, maybe the exhaustion of so many years, or maybe that bitter thought that no one should see 3 kids eating like it was their last chance. "What are your names?" she asked, trying to keep her voice from shaking. The 3 looked at each other again. "I'm Matthew," said the first one. "I'm Gabriel," said the second one, the one in the middle. "And I'm Daniel," said the third. Mrs. Eleanor nodded slowly, etching those names in her mind like someone guarding something they don't want to lose. "And where do you sleep?" she asked. The 3 of them looked down. "Wherever we can," Gabriel murmured. Mrs. Eleanor tightened her fingers around the ladle. She looked around. People were passing by, buying things, not looking. A couple crossed the street laughing, not noticing the kids. A man in a nice shirt barely turned his head and scowled, as if hunger was contagious. Mrs. Eleanor felt a stab of anger, and then she heard a voice behind her, cold as stone. "Mrs. E, giving away food again." She turned around. It was a man from the neighborhood, one of those types who always talks like he owns the block. Mr. Roger, the one who claimed to know the people in charge of city permits. "Don't come complaining later when you don't have enough money," he added, looking at the kids like they were garbage. The triplets sat perfectly still. One gripped the edge of his bowl, another hid his face. Mrs. Eleanor straightened up, even though her back hurt. "I'm not complaining," she said firmly, "and they are eating." Mr. Roger let out a little laugh. "You're going to fill your cart with vagrants," he muttered, "and then the inspectors come, and that's it. Goodbye." Mrs. Eleanor held his gaze without lowering her head. "Let them come," she said. "There's nothing dirty here, just hunger." Mr. Roger clicked his tongue and walked away, but his threat stayed there, floating in the air. Mrs. Eleanor watched the children. Matthew looked at her like he couldn't understand why anyone would stand up for them. Gabriel swallowed slowly. Daniel tightened his lips with held-back rage. Mrs. Eleanor lowered her voice. "Eat up," she told them. "And when you're done, tell me where you're going. I won't rest easy if I just let you go like this." The three looked at each other, and for the first time their eyes showed something more than hunger. They showed a tiny hope, like a flickering flame. Mrs. Eleanor didn't know it, but in that instant, with 3 simple bowls and a firm sentence, she had just done something that the world doesn't easily forgive or forget, because feeding 3 homeless children was an act of kindness, but it was also, without meaning to, a promise. The street remained the same. Cars passing, people buying without looking, the grill letting out that sizzle that sounded like a tired heart. But for Mrs. Eleanor, the afternoon wasn't the same anymore since the 3 kids sat on her plastic stools. Matthew, Gabriel, and Daniel finished their portions with care, as if they wanted to stretch the warmth of the food so it would last longer. They didn't ask for more, not because they didn't want to, but because they were too embarrassed. Mrs. Eleanor grabbed a napkin and held it out to the one in the middle. "Clean yourself up good, son," she said without exaggerated sweetness, just like a real grandmother would. Gabriel nodded, lowering his gaze. "Thank you, ma'am," he murmured. Mrs. Eleanor picked up the bowls slowly, looking at their small hands, and a child's hands, but with street marks, a scratch on the knuckles, broken nails, fingers a little swollen from the cold of sleeping wherever. "Right then," she said, resting the bowls on the tray. "Where do you go when the sun goes down?" The 3 looked at each other like they were agreeing without speaking. "Under the overpass," Matthew said, almost voiceless. Mrs. Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. The overpass was a known place. Shadows, cardboard, dampness. The city had those corners where people disappeared without anyone noticing. "And why aren't you in a shelter?" she asked. Daniel tightened his mouth, suspicious. "They separate us," he said directly. "They say that's the rule." Mrs. Eleanor frowned. "And you won't let them." Gabriel shook his head with a sad stubbornness. "If they separate us, we won't find each other again," he said. He swallowed hard, and being alone is worse. Mrs. Eleanor stayed quiet for a second. She looked at the pot, looked at the street, looked at her little cash box, and felt a silent rage toward those kinds of rules made from a desk and applied on the skin of children. "Okay," she said. "Fine. I'm not going to separate you either." The triplets looked up at the same time, as if that sentence were a roof over their heads. Mrs. Eleanor lowered her voice. "But you aren't leaving without me knowing something else," she said. "Who left you like this? Do you have family?" Matthew shrugged his shoulders. Daniel looked away. Gabriel took a second, but spoke. "We don't remember well," he murmured. "Just a car at night, and then... that's it." Mrs. Eleanor felt a shiver. It wasn't a full story, it was a fragment, and missing fragments usually hide hard things. She didn't push it. She didn't want to force the pain out. "Well," she said, "you ate today, and tomorrow if you want, you can come back, but on one condition." The 3 tensed up like they feared a payment. "Which one?" Daniel asked. Mrs. Eleanor looked at them firmly. "That you don't steal," she said. "Not out of hunger and not out of anger. If I give to you, you respect me and respect yourselves." Matthew nodded fast. "We don't steal," he said. Daniel pressed his lips together. "Sometimes they accuse us, even if we don't," he mumbled. Mrs. Eleanor understood. "On the street, guilt is handed out according to your face and clothes." "Not here," she said. "Here we speak the truth." The children stayed quiet, and then when Gabriel moved to get off the stool, something poked out from his shirt collar, a thin chain, dirty from dust, with a small charm. Mrs. Eleanor barely saw it, but she saw it. It was a metal charm, simple, with a very specific shape, 3 little rings linked together like a family bond, or 3 stars in a cluster. Mrs. Eleanor froze. She had seen that symbol before, not on the street, but in a place that didn't match a homeless child. "Hey," she said softly, "that little pendant. Where did you get it?" Gabriel touched his chest instinctively, as if protecting it. "It's mine," he said suspiciously. "I had it from before." Mrs. Eleanor swallowed hard. "From before being on the street?" Gabriel nodded. Matthew and Daniel got closer as if the charm were something sacred. "All 3 of us have one," said Matthew, pulling down his shirt collar to show his. Daniel did the same. The 3 charms were identical, Mrs. Eleanor felt her heart skip a beat. It wasn't common. It wasn't something bought at a flea market. It was a symbol of someone who had money, or family, or a place where they order matching things made for 3 matching children. Mrs. Eleanor looked at the symbol again, and something in her memory moved like a creaky door. She remembered an old news article from years ago, a missing persons poster stuck on a lamppost near the market. 3 alike, a desperate family, a phone number, a reward offered, and a small logo in the corner, that same one with 3 linked rings. Mrs. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her fingers. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked, seeing her look so serious. Mrs. Eleanor swallowed hard, trying not to scare them. "Nothing, my child," she said, but her voice didn't quite obey her. "It's just, that symbol isn't from the streets." Gabriel clutched the charm tight. "I don't know," he said. "I just know that when I touch it, I remember a voice singing." Matthew stared at the ground. "And a smell," he whispered, "like expensive soap." Daniel frowned. "And I remember a big gate," he said quietly, "tall, made of iron." Mrs. Eleanor froze. A gate, expensive soap, a singing voice. That wasn't an overpass. That was a home. Mrs. Eleanor looked around as if someone might be listening. The street was normal, but she wasn't normal on the inside anymore because she understood what no one else saw. These kids didn't just have hunger. They had a history, and if someone looked for them with a reward and a logo, then someone else also wanted to make sure nobody found them. Mrs. Eleanor took a deep breath, leaned toward them, and lowered her voice. "Listen to me closely," she said. "Today, you're not going to the overpass. Today, you're staying close to me. And not because I want you to, but because I feel like someone might want you gone." The 3 of them looked at her, terrified. "Who?" asked Gabriel, Mrs. Eleanor gripped the ladle like it was a shield. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'm going to find out." And for the first time at that humble cart, the danger stopped feeling like hunger and started feeling like something bigger, like a shadow coming from the past. The sun dipped a little lower, and the air turned cool with that city smell that mixes exhaust, food, and rain on pavement. Mrs. Eleanor stayed behind her cart, stirring the ladle with feigned calm, but inside she was tense. The 3 charms with the linked ring symbol had sparked a memory she didn't want to fully believe. Matthew, Gabriel, and Daniel stayed close without crossing the street, as if for the first time they had a place where they weren't chased away immediately. They didn't talk much, watching people cautiously, and every time someone got too close, the 3 huddled tight together like they were one person. Mrs. Eleanor handed them a glass of water. "Drink slowly," she said. "I don't want you getting sick on me." Gabriel took the glass carefully. "Thank you, ma'am." Just then, a dry laugh rang out a few steps away. Well, look at her. Mrs. Eleanor spun around. Mr. Roger was walking up with two men behind him, the kind who always look like they have permission to do whatever they want. One had a folder, the other a cap and a cheap radio. Mr. Roger was smiling like he was here to collect a debt he'd enjoy. "Mrs. E," he said, "what a big heart, giving free food to strays. Don't come crying to me later when they take your card away." The triplets went still. Matthew looked down. Daniel pressed his lips together. Gabriel pressed himself closer to the edge of the cart, hiding. Mrs. Eleanor straightened up. "They're not strays," she said. "They're children." Mr. Roger raised an eyebrow. "Children who eat for free today and rob you tomorrow," he shot back. "That's how it starts." One of the men behind him opened the folder and pretended to read. "We received a complaint," he said, "for unsanitary conditions and obstruction of a public sidewalk." Mrs. Eleanor felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. That word, unsanitary, was their favorite when they wanted to take something from you without admitting you were just in the way. "My cart is clean," she said firmly. "It's always been clean." The man shrugged. "That's for us to decide." Mrs. Eleanor, she looked at the grill, the pots, the jars. Everything was in order, she knew it, but she also knew that when an inspector arrives wanting to find something, he finds it. Mr. Rogers smiled. "I told you, Mrs. E," he murmured. "If you wanted to stay out of trouble, you should have listened to me." Mrs. Eleanor looked at him with suppressed rage. "What do you want?" He lowered his voice, but just enough for the kids to hear. "I want you to stop attracting problems," he said, "and I want those kids out of here." Gabriel looked up, terrified. Matthew gripped the edge of the bench. Daniel, however, took a step forward as if he wanted to stand in front. Mrs. Eleanor reached a hand toward him, stopping him without touching him. "No," she whispered, "don't get involved." Mr. Rogers saw the gesture and scoffed. "Look how cute. She has guardians now," he said. "How much do you pay them?" "With soup?" People started turning around. Some curious onlookers got closer, and that was the plan. Public humiliation, so shame would do the work. A lady from the nearby store muttered, "That's why this place is full of troublemakers." A man on a bike shouted out, "Call child services on them!" The children heard it and shrank down even more. Mrs. Eleanor felt the anger rising, but forced herself to speak calmly. "They haven't done anything," she said. "They're eating, that's all." The inspector with the folder walked up to the cart and stuck his nose in, looking for a stench. He grunted exaggeratedly. "Smells weird here." Mrs. Eleanor tightened her grip on the ladle. "It smells like food," she said. "Like it should." Mr. Roger took a step forward and pointed at the triplets. "You see?" he told the crowd. "This woman encourages street life. Then they go around stealing and everyone complains, but nobody lifts a finger." Daniel clenched his fists. His eyes burned with rage. "We don't steal," he blurted out, unable to hold it back. The silence lasted a second, and in that second Mr. Roger smiled. "Oh, no?" he said. "Then prove it. Let's see what you've got in your pockets." Daniel froze. Matthew looked at Gabriel with fear. Gabriel instinctively clutched his pendant. Mrs. Eleanor stepped forward, planting herself firmly. "You have no right," she said loudly. "They're just kids." The man with the radio stepped closer. "We do have the right, if there's suspicion," he said. The crowd murmured. The word suspicion was like gasoline. Mr. Roger raised his voice like he was performing a public service. "Mrs. E, don't be difficult. Either you run them off, or I run them off with the real authorities." Mrs. Eleanor felt the world crashing down on her, and in that moment, she saw something. The torn pocket on Matthew's pants, the trembling of Gabriel's chin, the desperate rage in Daniel. They were children, they were hungry, and now they had humiliation. Mrs. Eleanor took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and spoke clearly, for everyone to hear. "If you're here to take my cart, then take it," she said, "but I'm not going to chase away 3 children like they're dogs. If seeing hunger bothers you, it's because you've never felt it." The street went silent for a second. Some looked down, others shifted uncomfortably, but Mr. Roger wasn't the kind of man who felt shame. So that's how it's going to be, he said, smiling. Fine. He signaled to the inspector with the clipboard. Write this down, he ordered. Refusal to cooperate. Presence of minors in an irregular situation. Sanitary risk. Mrs. Eleanor felt her legs shaking, but she didn't back down. Then, the man with the radio took a step toward the cart, reaching in like he was going to turn off the gas or knock something over. And in that movement, his gaze locked onto Gabriel's chest, where the 3-linked rings pendant was peeking out. The man froze for a second, and his face changed. "Hey," he said in a low voice. "That symbol." Gabriel covered his chest. Mrs. Eleanor noticed it. Mr. Roger did too. "What is it?" he asked quickly, moving closer, and the man with the radio hesitated. "Nothing," he said, but it was already too late. Mr. Roger looked at Gabriel with more attention, as if for the first time he didn't see a filthy kid but something else. Something that could be worth money. And Mrs. Eleanor felt an internal alarm because she understood the real danger in that instant. It wasn't that they were being called vagrants, it was that someone had just recognized them. The words hung in the air, dangerous and small. That symbol. The man with the radio had said it almost by accident, but it was enough to send a chill down Mrs. Eleanor's spine. Gabriel covered his chest immediately. Matthew took a step back. Daniel clenched his fists as if his rage could protect them. Mr. Roger tilted his head, sniffing out an opportunity like a dog smelling meat. "What is it?" he asked, feigning curiosity. The man with the radio backed away nervously. "Nothing," he murmured. "It's nothing." Mrs. Eleanor moved fast and put herself in front of the children, shielding them with her thin body and stained apron. It wasn't much, but it was a wall. "Enough," she said firmly. "If you're coming here to make things up, make up something else. There is no crime here." Mr. Roger let out a laugh, but the laugh was no longer mocking. It was calculating. "Mrs. I just want to help you," he said. "You get into trouble for being too kind, and the street doesn't forgive." Mrs. Eleanor looked at him the way one looks at someone disguised as a friend. "I don't need your help," she replied. Mr. Roger made a gesture with his hand as if surrendering, but his gaze remained locked on Gabriel's neck. "Well," he said, "don't say you weren't warned later." The inspector put away the clipboard without fully finishing the threat. The man with the radio avoided looking at the children. The 3 of them walked away, but they didn't leave in a hurry. They left with that fake calm that says, "I saw something, and I'll be back." When they finally turned the corner, Mrs. Eleanor let out her breath as if she had been holding it since they arrived. The children remained still, not moving. "Ma'am," Matthew murmured, "we're leaving." Mrs. Eleanor looked at the street, looked at the cart, looked at the setting sun, and decided without saying it yet. "Today, you are not leaving my side," she said. "Not to the overpass, not anywhere." Gabriel's eyes went wide. "But if we stay, they'll shut down your cart." Mrs. Eleanor gripped the ladle as if it were a cane. "The cart can be lost," she said. "You cannot." Daniel lowered his gaze for a second, swallowing something down. Then he spoke with a small voice, almost ashamed. "We don't want to be a burden." Mrs. Eleanor looked at him. "You aren't a burden," she said. "You're children." The afternoon went on, 2 customers arrived, and Mrs. Eleanor served them with quick hands, as always. The children stayed to the side, quiet and watching. And in that watching, Mrs. Eleanor noticed something. They weren't street kids in the way people usually think. They didn't have the knack for stealing. They had the knack for enduring. When a customer left extra change, Matthew saw it, but he didn't reach out his hand. When a lady got distracted with her open purse, Gabriel looked at it and closed it discreetly so no one would take anything. When a neighborhood kid made fun of them, Daniel didn't respond with fists, he just looked at him with a quiet rage. Mrs. Eleanor realized something. Those 3 were starving, sure, but they had an internal code too, even if they didn't know where it came from. When night fell, Mrs. Eleanor closed up the cart. She packed away the jars, turned off the gas, covered the pot, and checked the little cash box. It had been a slow day, but she didn't care anymore. "Come on," she told them. "Let's walk." The boys looked at each other suspicious. "Where to?" Gabriel asked. Mrs. Eleanor nodded her head. "To my apartment," she said. "It isn't big, but at least it doesn't leak." The three of them froze. "No," Matthew mumbled. "We don't want any trouble." Mrs. Eleanor cut him off. "Trouble has already come looking for you," she said. "And if you go back to that overpass, I don't know if I'll see you tomorrow." The boys stayed quiet, and that silence was a yes. They walked through busy sidewalks. Mrs. Eleanor led the way with her cart, wheels squeaking, while the boys stuck close behind her. Every now and then, one of them would look back as if someone was following them. When they reached a small walk-up apartment, Mrs. Eleanor unlocked the door. Inside, it smelled like cheap soap and stale bread. There was a simple bed, an old chair, and a tiny shelf with an unlit candle. "Here," she said. "There's no luxury, but there is a roof." The boys entered slowly, as if the room were a sacred place. Mrs. Eleanor took out some hard bread and broke it into 3 pieces. "Just eat a little," she said, "and tomorrow we'll see what we do." Matthew took it carefully. "Why are you helping us?" he asked, not understanding. Mrs. Eleanor stood still for a second. She didn't know how to explain it with pretty words, so she just told the simple truth. "Because if I were on the street, I would have wanted someone to see me as a person." The boys looked down. Mrs. Eleanor sat in the chair and looked at them, one by one. "Now, conditions," she said firmly. The 3 looked up. "No stealing here," she said. "No lying here. And if someone is looking for you, you tell me. You're not going to hide from me." Gabriel clutched the charm under his shirt. "We don't know who's looking for us." Mrs. Eleanor looked at him. "Someone recognized that symbol," she said. "And when someone recognizes something on you, it's not always out of kindness." Daniel frowned. "So, what do we do?" Mrs. Eleanor took a deep breath. "We make a pact," she said. "A silent pact." Matthew watched her, attentive. "You help me at the cart," she continued. "You clean, you organize, you carry things, so no one can say you just come to eat. And I give you food and shelter until we find out the truth about that symbol." The 3 looked at each other, and for the first time, their eyes lit up with something like pride. "Yes," Matthew said. "Yes," repeated Gabriel. "Yes," said Daniel, the toughest one, but his voice trembled a little. Mrs. Eleanor nodded, and that night, while the city looked away, a pact was signed in a humble apartment, one with no paper, but with something stronger: loyalty. Except outside, on some corner, Mr. Roger had made his own pact too, but with greed, and Mrs. Eleanor could feel it in her bones. The next morning, the cart smelled like it always did: soup, rolls, and freshly chopped onions. But there was a difference Mrs. Eleanor couldn't shake off: the feeling that they were being watched. Matthew, Gabriel, and Daniel arrived early, before the sun heated up the pavement. Their hair was still damp, like they'd washed their faces with the seriousness of someone wanting to look respectable. Without saying much, they started helping. One arranged the stools, another cleaned the grill, and the third carried a bucket of water that was way too big for him. Mrs. Eleanor watched them in silence with a strange mix of pride and fear. "Easy with that, son," she told Daniel when she saw him straining his back. "I don't want you getting hurt." Daniel nodded stubbornly, like he didn't know how to accept being cared for. Throughout the morning, people looked at them differently, some with discomfort, others with pity. Some bought things just to stare, as if the cart were a show. And in the middle of that bustle, Mr. Roger appeared on the other side of the street. He didn't come closer, he just leaned against a wall, watching, smiling with his lips, but not his eyes. Mrs. Eleanor felt her blood run cold. "Don't look at him," she whispered to the boys. "You just keep working." Gabriel, though, saw him out of the corner of his eye and clutched the 3-linked rings charm under his shirt, as if his skin warned him before his mind did. The day went on. By noon, Mrs. Eleanor almost relaxed. Almost. And then, during a brief pause, Matthew walked up to her, his voice quiet. "Ma'am, I had a dream last night," he said. Mrs. Eleanor looked at him. "What did you dream, son?" Matthew swallowed hard. "I dreamed they were calling us by another name," he murmured. Like we had fancy last names." Mrs. Eleanor felt a pang in her chest. "Do you remember the name?" Matthew shook his head in frustration. "It slips my mind, but I heard a song, and it smelled like expensive soap, just like Gabriel said." Mrs. Eleanor stayed quiet for a second. Then she stroked his hair clumsily, like someone not used to showing tenderness. Calmly, she said, "The important thing is that you're here with me." Matthew looked down and nodded, but that comfort didn't last long because at 2 o'clock, at 1:30, when the sun was beating down hard and the street looked like it was dozing off, a white SUV braked half a block away, then another, then a patrol car moving slowly, no sirens, like they wanted it to look normal. Mrs. Eleanor felt her heart jump into her throat. "Don't move," she told the kids fast. "Stay glued to me." The three of them got close immediately, as if they already knew this kind of danger. Two people in vests carrying folders got out of the SUVs. One had an ID badge hanging around his neck. The patrol car parked nearby. A police officer looked over without rushing, and as if the world wanted to confirm the worst, Mrs. Eleanor saw Mr. Roger walking behind them with that "I brought them" look on his face. The woman in the vest spoke first. "Good afternoon. We're here regarding a report of minors in a street situation, presumed health risk, and possible exploitation." Mrs. Eleanor felt her face burn. "Exploitation," she repeated. "I fed them." The man in the vest held up the folder. "Ma'am, we're not accusing you," he said with a mechanical voice. "We just have to verify. Do these children live with you?" Mrs. Eleanor clutched her apron. "They stayed last night," she admitted, "because they were on the street." The woman looked at the three boys and her voice softened a bit. "Boys, what are your names?" Matthew opened his mouth, but Daniel stepped forward, suspicious. "Matthew, Gabriel, and Daniel." The woman nodded, taking notes. "Do you have family? Is anyone looking for you?" Mrs. Eleanor felt the world spin a little. If she said yes, maybe they'd take them. If she said no, maybe they'd take them anyway. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I just know someone recognized a symbol they're wearing." The man in the vest frowned. "Is that so?" Gabriel instinctively covered his chest. The woman leaned in gently. "Don't worry," she said. "We're not going to hurt you, we just want to help." Mrs. Eleanor heard that phrase and still, the fear didn't go down. Not because she thought they'd hurt them, but because she knew what she'd already been told. "You separate them. Don't take them separately," Mrs. Eleanor blurted out, almost without thinking. "I beg you, if you separate them, they get lost." The woman in the vest looked at her with a mix of exhaustion and pity. "Ma'am, I don't decide that," she said. "There are protocols." Daniel clenched his fists. "No," he said, and his voice cracked. "Don't separate us." Matthew clung to Gabriel. Gabriel stood still, his gaze fixed on the patrol car. Mrs. Eleanor felt like her chest was splitting open. "Look at the cart," she said desperately, pointing. "It's clean. They help out. I'm not using them. I just couldn't leave them." And the bored policeman said, "Lady, don't make this complicated." And that indifference felt like a blow. Then the man in the vest opened his folder and showed something. A printed sheet with a logo in the corner. Mrs. Eleanor froze. 3 linked rings, the same symbol. The woman in the vest looked at Mrs. Eleanor with a new seriousness. "Ma'am, these children might have been reported missing years ago." She paused. "We have to take them into protective custody to verify their identity." Mrs. Eleanor felt her legs go weak. "Missing," Mr. Roger whispered behind them, smiling like he'd just won the lottery. "See, Mrs. E," he said, "you sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Mrs. Eleanor looked at him with a silent rage. "It was you," she murmured. Mr. Roger shrugged. "I just reported it," he said, "for the good of the children." A lie wrapped in goodness. The Vests approached the triplets calmly, without aggression, but firmly. The boys took a step back, clinging to Mrs. Eleanor. "Ma'am," Matthew said with a trembling voice, "you're going to leave us." Mrs. Eleanor felt something inside her break. "No," she said, swallowing hard, "I'm not going to leave you." The woman in the vest looked at her. "You can come with us to the office if you want," she said, "but you can't stop the custody order." Mrs. Eleanor nodded fast. "I'm going," she said. "I'm going with them." In that moment, Daniel turned toward the card as if he wanted to memorize it. Gabriel squeezed his pendant. Matthew looked at Mrs. Eleanor like someone holding on to the only thing they had. They put them in a van, together for now. Mrs. Eleanor climbed in too, shaking, with her apron still on. The door closed, and when the vehicle started, Mrs. Eleanor saw through the window Mr. Roger staying on the corner, watching them leave with satisfaction. Mrs. Eleanor pressed her lips together because she understood it wasn't help. It was a move. Someone had activated something big, and now the children were no longer under her watch. And that day, in seconds, Mrs. Eleanor lost what she had barely started to care for. The street went back to making its noise like nothing happened. That was what hurt the most. The same distant siren, the same market calls, the same sun hitting the sidewalk, and Mrs. Eleanor's cart there, empty inside. The pot turned off, the stools arranged with no one on them, the grill cold. The children had gone in a white van with a protective custody that sounded like a clean word, but felt like a theft. Mrs. Eleanor tried to follow them up that same day. She went to offices, she asked, she begged, she gave her name, her address, her story. They told her, "Come back tomorrow." They told her, "The system is down." They told her, "It's under review." They quoted protocols at her. And one day, without meaning to, she heard the words she already knew in her gut. "Ma'am, if you're not family, we can't give you any information." Mrs. Eleanor walked out of there like someone who'd just lost a limb. Still walking, but incomplete. The food cart kept going, because when you need to survive, you don't get much time to cry. The next day, she lit the grill again, made rolls, heated the pot. But every time she heard little footsteps getting closer, her heart would light up, and then go dark. Because it wasn't them. Matthew, Gabriel, Daniel. Their names stuck in her like 3 sweet thorns. Weeks went by, then months. Mrs. Eleanor invented routines just to keep from going crazy, sweeping the same patch of sidewalk, scrubbing the same spot on the cart, saving 3 extra napkins. Just in case they came back. Sometimes, without thinking, she'd push 3 stools together. Then, when she realized what she'd done, she'd pull them apart fast, ashamed of her own hope. In the neighborhood, people talked for 2 days, and then they forgot. "Good thing they took them," some said. "Gets rid of the trouble." Others whispered. Mrs. Eleanor had gotten too attached, they said, and that was the worst part, that they called it getting attached when what she did was protect them. One afternoon, Mr. Roger walked past the cart and dropped a comment like he was dropping a heavy stone. "See?" he said, smiling. "In the end, everything works out when you do the right thing." Mrs. Eleanor looked at him with silent hatred. "Get lost," said Mr. Roger, shrugging his shoulders. "You got yourself into this mess," he mumbled, and walked away. Over time, Mr. Roger became a bigger deal on the block. He started charging protection fees, claiming he could fix permits. Sometimes he'd stand just 2 meters from her cart, as if reminding her that he could make her life miserable whenever he wanted. Mrs. Eleanor endured it. She endured it for years. Her hair turned whiter, her back grew more hunched, and her hands got rougher. Her regulars grew old right along with her. Some of them never came back. Others would tell her, "Mrs. E., you should rest." But Mrs. Eleanor wouldn't rest because rest meant silence. And in the silence she could hear voices. Sometimes she dreamed the children were outside, and she couldn't open the door. Sometimes she dreamed she was looking for them in an alley full of shadows, and all she found were their 3 linked rings charms lying on the ground. In a box in her apartment, she kept the little that remained of them. A folded napkin with a ketchup stain, a cheap plastic spoon that Gabriel had used, and a drawing Matthew left her one morning, a food cart with 3 stick-figure kids. She guarded it like it was gold. One day, many years later, a lady selling flowers nearby asked her, "Mrs. Eleanor, do you still think about those kids?" Mrs. Eleanor didn't answer with words. She just looked at the street. Because, yes, every day the neighborhood changed. The block filled with more vendors. The market expanded. Better phones arrived, newer cars, people in a rush. But Mrs. Eleanor's cart stayed exactly the same. Old, humble, clean. A fixed point in a world that never stopped. And she became part of the landscape. Just another old woman. Until one random Friday, when the sun was high and the air smelled of oil and rolls, Mrs. Eleanor heard a sound that didn't belong on her block. A roar. Not a motorcycle, not a truck. A refined, expensive roar. The people around her turned to look first. She didn't. She kept serving out of habit until the noise got so close that the sidewalk vibrated. Mrs. Eleanor looked up and saw 3 shiny cars. Low, aggressive, like animals from another world. 3 Teslas braked right in front of her cart. The street went silent. Mrs. Eleanor felt the ladle slip a little in her hand. Because in that instant, without understanding why, she knew life was about to collect on an old debt. The 3 sleek Teslas sat motionless in front of the cart, as if the world had hit the brakes with them. The street filled with eyes. People who usually walked past without looking stopped now, raising their phones, whispering. Loose phrases floated in the air. Who died? What are they going to buy here? No way they know Mrs. E. Mrs. Eleanor held the ladle with a trembling hand, not from excitement yet, but from fear. Because in her life, whenever something shiny appeared suddenly, it almost always brought bad news. One of the cars cut its engine, then the second, then the third. The silence that followed was strange, heavy, like inside a church. Mrs. Eleanor didn't move. She watched the cars the way you watch a storm, waiting for the lightning to strike. And the strike wasn't a noise, it was a memory. Because in that instant, the black reflection of the cars threw back her own image. A thin, hunched old woman with a stained apron, her face marked by the sun and the years. A woman who had spent too much time swallowing her words. The past crashed down on her without asking permission. It wasn't just the children. It was everything Mrs. Eleanor had learned to bottle up just to keep living. She had been young once. She'd had a small house with a yard. She once had a husband who smelled of earth and bar soap, a hard worker with strong hands. His name was Mr. Julian. He wasn't rich, but he was one of those men who always come back, no matter how tired they are. Until one day, he didn't. An accident, an ambulance that arrived too late, a hospital that only helped when it could. Mrs. Eleanor watched him fade away without the money to buy miracles, and she was left alone with life weighing heavy in her hands. Then came her son, her only son, Stephen. Stephen was her pride and her fear. He grew up watching his mother work and swore that one day he would get her off the streets. He studied a little, worked a little, and one day he left for the big city to look for opportunities. Mrs. Eleanor would pack him food in a napkin when he came to visit, as if he were still a child. But the city doesn't forgive those who go without someone watching their back. Stephen got into a bad job with bad people. Just for a while, he told her over the phone, just to save up and come back. Mrs. Eleanor didn't understand those worlds, but she understood the tone of someone who is scared and doesn't want it to show. One day, Stephen stopped calling. Mrs. Eleanor searched for him with everything she had, her feet, her voice, and her shame. She went to stations, to offices, to churches. They told her the same thing they would tell her years later with the Triplets. If you aren't family with papers, we can't help. Mrs. Eleanor was left with the hollow space in her home. And then the worst part happened. The people, the street, the neighborhood started to talk. Her son ran off. Her son was a thief. Her son left her for another woman. Mrs. Eleanor never knew the whole truth. She only knew that when loneliness moves in, it starts bending you from the inside. That's why, when she saw Matthew, Gabriel, and Daniel that afternoon, starving, it wasn't just kindness. It was one wound recognizing another wound. It was a mother without a son, looking at 3 children without a mother, and that's why she cared too much, as people said, because in them, Mrs. Eleanor felt a second chance to do something right, even if the world told her she was worthless. The roar of cars brought her back to the present. A door opened, then another, then another. 3 men stepped out almost at the same time, all 3 tall, all 3 with presence, all 3 with that quiet elegance that doesn't need to shout. They weren't boys from the neighborhood. They looked like they were from another world. Mrs. Eleanor looked at them and felt a strange jolt, like when something familiar is hiding inside the impossible. And yet, her first reaction was human. She lowered her eyes because the first thing she felt was shame. Shame for her old cart, for her apron, for her burned hands, for her whole life summed up in a cooking pot. She wanted to hide behind the cart, but she couldn't. The 3 men walked toward her slowly, not in a rush, not mocking, as if every step was out of respect. Mrs. Eleanor gripped the ladle tight. What can I get you?" she asked with a small voice. The man in the middle looked at her with held-back emotion, as if it hurt him not to break down right there. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said softly. She looked up, and in that gaze something opened, an invisible thread, because those eyes were the same ones she had seen on 3 dirty faces years ago under her canopy. Mrs. Eleanor felt her chest fill with air and then empty out. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. The 3 men stopped in front of the cart, and the one in the middle, his voice trembling as if he finally allowed himself to feel, let out a sentence that split her world in 2. "We didn't forget you." Mrs. Eleanor felt her knees go weak, and in her head, like an old echo, the 3 names returned. Matthew, Gabriel, Daniel, but she still didn't dare believe it, because Mrs. Eleanor had already lost too much, and the heart, when it has lost too much, learns to suspect even miracles. The sentence hung suspended between the smoke of the grill and the sleek shine of the cars. "We didn't forget you." Mrs. Eleanor squeezed the ladle like it was a lucky charm. She looked the 3 men up and down, trying to find the lie, while at the same time her heart clung to a dangerous idea. And what if it is them? The street had turned into a stage. There were people recording. Some came closer without shame. Others pretended to buy just to stay and watch. Matthew, Gabriel, and Daniel noticed the cameras, and without saying a word, they positioned themselves naturally. One to the right of the cart, one to the left, one in front, as if they were protecting her. Mrs. Eleanor swallowed hard. She tried to speak. "Who are you?" The one in the middle took another step. His voice came out soft but firm. "First, if I may," he said, "we can talk without so many eyes on us." Mrs. Eleanor looked around. The stares went right through her, and then she felt that old fear come back. The same fear from when they took the children, the same fear of the protocols and papers of those in charge. And, as if fear called out to fear, a familiar, poisonous voice was heard from behind. Well, look at you now. Looks like you hit the jackpot, Mrs. E. Mrs. Eleanor turned around. Mr. Roger came walking up with his usual smile, the kind that doesn't ask permission to intrude. He had his hands in his pockets, confident, as if the street still belonged to him. The people looked at him with curiosity. He puffed himself up. "How nice," he said, raising his voice a little. "You help the community, right? And then the rewards come rolling in." Mrs. Eleanor felt her blood boil. "Get out, Roger," she said dryly. Mr. Roger let out a laugh. "I'm just here to say hello," he said, "and to ask something." He looked at the 3 men. "You guys own those fancy rides? 'Cause around here you need permits to park like that." Matthew looked at him without emotion. "We're not here to park," he said. "We're here to see Mrs. Eleanor." Mr. Roger tilted his head, feigning respect. "Ah, well, that's good," he said. "Because look, Mrs. E., I don't want people saying later that I didn't look out for you. There are rules here, and if money's involved, well, there are fees." Mrs. Eleanor clutched her apron. She knew that word. Fees meant extortion with a smile. Gabriel took a step toward Mr. Roger without raising his voice. "You're charging fees to an old lady?" Mr. Roger asked. He laughed, acting like it was nothing. "Don't get confused, young man," he said. "I don't charge. I help manage things, keep everything in order here." Mrs. Eleanor understood. Daniel gave Mr. Roger a dry look. "And did you help the day they took 3 kids away too?" The tension could be cut with a knife. Mr. Roger blinked for a fraction of a second, but Mrs. Eleanor saw it. His smile went stiff. "What kids?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "I don't even remember." Mrs. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. The triplets looked at each other as if confirming an old suspicion. Matthew spoke calmly. "We remember." The crowd around them murmured. Some people moved their phones closer. Mr. Roger threw his hands up, theatrical. "Oh, no," he said. "Don't go trying to blame me for things now. I'm a decent citizen." Mrs. Eleanor stepped forward, trembling with rage. "You pointed them out," she said, almost in a whisper. "You brought those people here." Mr. Roger smiled, but now it had an edge to it. "Mrs. E., don't get yourself into trouble," he said quietly, just for her. "It's in your best interest not to stir up the past, especially now that there's money involved." That sentence felt like a punch, because it wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. He saw an opportunity. Matthew heard it too, and his voice was firm but steady. "There's no money involved here. There's a moral debt, and you're not going to cash in on it." Mr. Roger shrugged, but his gaze turned dark. "Look, young man, I don't know who you are," he said, "but this block has an owner, and that owner is the law. If I make a call, inspectors show up, and it's bye-bye cart. And Mrs. Eleanor is too old to be dealing with shocks." Mrs. Eleanor felt fear rise like cold water, because it was true. Every time he wanted, inspectors appeared. Gabriel leaned in toward Mrs. Eleanor. "Don't be afraid," he said softly. "You're not alone today." Mrs. Eleanor looked at him, and those words caused a beautiful kind of ache. Because for years she had been alone, and loneliness makes you obey out of sheer exhaustion. Daniel gave Mr. Roger a cold stare. "If you threaten her again, we go public." Mr. Roger let out a short laugh. "Public," he said. "Around here, the public forgets by tomorrow, and you guys will be gone." "She stays." That was the cruelest line, because it was true. Mrs. Eleanor's life remained here, miracle or not. Matthew took a step closer, his voice low, dangerous because it was so calm. "We're not leaving." Mr. Roger looked at him, sizing him up. "Oh, no?" Matthew held his gaze. "We're not leaving until we fix what you broke, Mr. Roger pursed his lips for a second, then raised an eyebrow and smiled like a man deciding to play dirty. "Then we'll settle this the easy way, or the local way," he said, pointing at the city hall in the distance. He walked away, but not like someone retreating, like someone going for backup. Mrs. Eleanor watched him walk away and felt that old fear pierce her again. "They're going to do the same thing to me all over again," she murmured. "They'll come with papers, with police." Matthew looked at her, serious. "Yes," he said, "they're going to try." Gabriel clenched his jaw. "And this time, we'll be ready." Daniel looked around at the cell phones, but first said, "We need to get her out of here before the fear silences her." Mrs. Eleanor swallowed hard. The miracle was already here, but so was the system. And when the system feels like it's losing control, it attacks. The air felt strange after Mr. Roger left, as if he'd left a trail of poison behind. The phones were still held high. People kept murmuring, and Mrs. Eleanor, even with the 3 men right in front of her, felt that same old fear. The fear of papers, of red tape, of the world crushing you without ever laying a hand on you. Matthew spoke quietly. "We're moving," he said. "We're exposed here." Mrs. Eleanor clutched her apron. "Where to?" she asked, her voice trembling. Gabriel looked at the cart, the pot, the grill. "First, let's close this up," he said. "We're not letting them use this to claim you ran away." Daniel stepped in front of the crowd and raised a hand, not shouting, just setting a boundary. "Excuse me," he said. Don't record the lady. Have some respect." Some lowered their phones in shame, while others moved closer, morbidly curious. A woman blurted out, "Well, if those cars are showing up, she must be into something." Mrs. Eleanor felt the shame like a physical blow. That same block, where they used to ignore her, was now looking at her like her poverty was just a disguise. Matthew walked up to the cart and calmly started packing things up. He didn't rush anything, clearly trying not to cause a scene. Gabriel killed the gas. Daniel arranged the stools. Mrs. Eleanor watched them, feeling a strange mix of emotions, gratitude and panic. "Don't get into trouble for my sake," Matthew murmured. He looked her in the eye. "Mrs. Eleanor, you got into trouble for us when you had nothing," he said. "Now it's our turn." Just then, a message popped up on Gabriel's phone, then another, then another. His face hardened. "It started," he muttered. "What?" asked Matthew. Gabriel turned the screen around. It was a post blowing up on local social media, a photo of the cart taken from a distance with a venomous headline. "Elderly woman involved in suspicious luxury car scheme at street cart." Mrs. Eleanor felt her stomach tie into a knot. "Involved?" she whispered, as if the word didn't belong in her life. Daniel clenched his jaw. "Roger is pushing this," he said. "And if it sticks, inspectors and police will be here tomorrow with a reason." Matthew looked at Mrs. Eleanor, serious. "Is your permit up to date?" he asked. Mrs. Eleanor lowered her gaze. "I have what I've always had," she murmured. "I pay what they ask, so they let me be." Gabriel tensed up. "Roger charges you." Mrs. Eleanor hesitated a second, then nodded, ashamed. "A fee," she said. "If I don't, they shut me down. That's how it works here." Matthew closed his eyes for a moment, holding back the rage. "Then it's not just gossip," he said. "It's extortion." Daniel looked toward the street like he could already see the guys in vests coming. "And Roger isn't satisfied with his cut. Now he wants to use you guys," he said. At that moment, Mrs. Eleanor heard a phrase that cut off her air. It came from two men standing nearby, whispering. "Must be some old scam, that's why she's getting those cars." Mrs. Eleanor felt like crying, but she swallowed the tears out of habit. The shame made her want to disappear. Matthew noticed, and that's when the shift happened. He wasn't just a man with money anymore, he was someone with a debt in his heart. "It's over," he said, and his voice wasn't soft anymore. Gabriel looked at him. "What are you thinking?" Matthew lifted his phone and dialed. "We're going to do what's never done here," he said. "Call the top." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Matthew answered without showing off, just with decision. "The district attorney and a major news outlet. Today, with proof." Mrs. Eleanor looked at him, terrified. "No, don't do that," she whispered. "Here, when you talk, you pay for it." Matthew leaned toward her with respectful firmness. "Mrs. Eleanor, you've already paid for years," he said. "With fear, with loneliness, with silence. Now we're going to collect with the truth." Mrs. Eleanor felt something inside her break loose. Gabriel quickly opened another screen on his phone, an old photo saved like treasure. It was blurry, but you could see a newspaper clipping with 3 identical little faces. In one corner, the 3 linked rings. "I kept this as long as I could," he said quietly. "Didn't know why, but I kept it." Daniel pressed his lips together. "So, the story doesn't start today," he murmured. "It starts the day they erased us." Mrs. Eleanor looked at them, and for the first time she understood without anyone saying it all. If those men were the boys, then the system didn't just humiliate her, it stole their lives too. And if Mr. Roger was involved, he wasn't just a nosy neighbor, he was a key piece. Matthew hung up the call and looked at the other 2. "Done," he said. "They're on their way." Gabriel swallowed hard. "So there's no turning back." Daniel looked toward the city hall in the distance, like someone watching a storm. "Let whoever needs to come," he said. "This time they won't separate us." Mrs. Eleanor squeezed her apron, trembling with the block full of eyes on her. Because the shame was already running through the city, and what was coming wasn't just an inspection, it was the final attempt to bury her in a rumor. It didn't even take an hour. The rumor was already in several groups, on neighborhood pages, in venomous comments, and when people smell blood, they become experts at inventing. Mrs. Eleanor tried to keep working out of pure habit, but her hands were shaking. Every customer who approached brought a different look: curiosity, suspicion, morbid fascination. The cart that was always invisible now was a spotlight. Matthew, Gabriel, and Daniel stayed close without showing off, like they were a wall. "They're coming," said Daniel, watching the street. And they came. 2 men with vests and a folder, a woman with a tablet, and behind them a patrol car moving slow without sirens, almost just like that time years ago, only now there were more phones recording. Mrs. Eleanor felt her chest close up again. "No," she murmured. Matthew leaned toward her. "Breathe," he said. "Today they don't step on you." The woman in the vest spoke with a bureaucratic voice. "Mrs. Eleanor, we are here for a verification. Report for irregular activity, possible suspicious dealings and obstruction of public sidewalk." Mrs. Eleanor opened her mouth, but the shame left her voiceless. Gabriel stepped forward. "Suspicious dealings?" he asked calmly. "With what proof?" The man with the folder held up a printed paper, the rumor post with screenshots. "We have citizen complaints." Daniel let out a short, cold laugh. "That's not a complaint, that's gossip," the officer said. He squared up, looking ready for a fight. Matthew raised a hand to calm things down and spoke without raising his voice. "Officer, we're going to cooperate, but everything is being recorded, and before you touch anything I want to see the warrant and full identification." The guy in the vest looked uncomfortable. "There's no need to get like that, son." Matthew stared right through him. "There is a need, because this lady has been extorted for years," he said, "and this smells like a setup." The word extortion changed the whole vibe. The crowd murmured louder. The inspectors glanced at each other. Just then, Mr. Roger appeared at the end of the street like the whole scene belonged to him. He didn't come close immediately, just watched with a cocky look. Daniel pointed him out with his chin. "There's the guy collecting the cut," he said. Mrs. Eleanor looked down, trembling. The woman in the vest furrowed her brow. "What cut?" Gabriel pulled out his phone and showed old messages, names, small transfers, and photos of papers with no official stamps. "This," he said, "payments so they don't shut her down every month. For the permit." The inspectors froze. The police officer shifted his stance. Matthew spoke straight to them. "We've already notified the district attorney. They're on their way. If this is legal, great. If it's a charade, it all falls apart today." The man with the binder swallowed hard. "We don't have to wait for anyone." Matthew smiled faintly. "Oh, yes, we do. If you're going to mess with an old lady's livelihood based on gossip," he said. "Or are you scared that someone from higher up is coming?" The inspectors stayed silent. Mrs. Eleanor felt tears in her eyes, but not from sadness, from exhaustion. Years of paying out of fear, and finally someone was saying it out loud, and then a car was heard braking nearby. Not like a Tesla, a man got out with his badge visible, 2 people behind him. "Good afternoon," he said. "State oversight. Who's in charge here?" The street went ice cold. Mr. Roger, in the background, took a step back, and Mrs. Eleanor realized the final push had happened. Either the system would crush them one more time, or he was finally getting exposed in front of everyone. Started. The man from State Oversight walked straight toward the cart, badge on display. He didn't come with a rush or a smile. He came with that office tone that was finally on the right side. "Who requested the intervention?" he asked. Matthew raised his hand. "We did," he said, "and we have evidence of extortion and staged inspections." The woman in the municipal vest shifted uncomfortably. The man with the binder swallowed hard. The cop glanced sideways at his partners, wondering what mess they'd dragged him into. Mrs. Eleanor was trembling, but she stayed on her feet. Her knees burned, her heart pounded hard. Whole years of enduring just to keep her block. And today, on that very same block, everything was about to come out. The state agent looked at the inspectors. IDs, he ordered. They pulled them out. Their hands didn't look so steady anymore. The state agent looked at the cart, looked at the flow of people, then looked at Mrs. Eleanor. "Ma'am, do you authorize us to review the charges they've made for permits over these years?" he asked. Mrs. Eleanor opened her mouth and the whole truth came out for the first time, without fear of looking foolish. "Yes," she said. "I paid because if I didn't pay they'd shut me down. Roger always told me that." The murmur of the street turned into a roar. "Roger! Mr. Roger charges a lady." In the back, Mr. Roger tried to smile, but the smile didn't fit anymore. "Don't make things up," he said, raising his voice. "I was just helping the lady with her paperwork." Gabriel stepped forward and showed the phone to the state agent. Messages, dates, amounts, a voice note where the veiled threat could be heard clearly. "If you don't pay, they raid you tomorrow." The state agent didn't even flinch. "That is extortion," he said dryly. The municipal cop swallowed hard. The man with the binder looked down, and then the thing Mrs. Eleanor had feared from the start happened. Roger wanted to escape the spotlight by making her the culprit. He took a step closer and pointed theatrically at the cart. Hold on, he shouted. "If you want to investigate the stuff about the kids too, because this lady has always been into weird stuff. She even kept 3 missing brats." Mrs. Eleanor felt the blow like a public slap in the face. The street froze. The state agent looked at him without emotion. "What kids?" Mrs. Eleanor swallowed hard. Her hands were shaking. Matthew spoke for her. "Us," he said. Silence. Gabriel and Daniel stood at her sides, as if holding up the air around her. "Officer," Matthew continued, "years ago, when we were kids, they took us into protective custody from this very cart. And him," he pointed at Roger, "he was the one who triggered it all." Mrs. Eleanor felt like her chest was cracking open. The word "us" was a miracle spoken out loud. The people looked at the 3 men with new eyes. Them. "Those are the kids," and the state agent furrowed his brow. Serious. "Do you have a way to prove it?" Gabriel pulled a chain from his neck. He held it up, a small metal charm, 3 linked rings. Then Matthew took out his, then Daniel took out his. 3 identical symbols. Mrs. Eleanor felt the tears rising without permission. Matthew looked at Mrs. Eleanor, his voice finally cracking. "You fed us when nobody else would," he said. "You gave us a roof over our heads. You defended us. You were the closest thing to a family we had." Mrs. Eleanor pressed her hand to her chest. I just... She tried to say, and then she broke. Not with screams, but with that silent weeping of someone who has held it in for years. "I looked for you," she whispered. "I looked for you so hard. Nobody would tell me anything. They told me I wasn't family, and I was left with nothing but your absence." Daniel lowered his head, holding back his rage. "They separated us for a while," he admitted, "but we found each other again, and since then we made a promise to come back for you." The street wasn't murmuring anymore. The street was listening. Roger, seeing everything crumbling down around him, tried to spin the narrative. "Just stories," he said. "Anyone can make that up." The state agent raised his hand. "Sir, that's enough," he said. "We have wire transfers, voice notes, witnesses, and proof of intent to manipulate an operation. You are under arrest for extortion and fraud." Roger froze. Arrested. He stammered, looking at the inspectors as if searching for salvation. "You guys know." The inspectors looked down. Nobody saved him. The police officer stepped forward, and there it was. Poetic justice. The man who made a living scaring others was now truly scared himself. Roger screamed, kicked, and demanded to speak to someone higher up, but he didn't reach anyone up there, because his power only existed as long as nobody called him out. Mrs. Eleanor watched him go and didn't feel joy. She felt relief. Years of relief. The state agent approached Mrs. Eleanor. "Ma'am, your card is protected while we investigate. Nobody is going to shut you down for this, and if you wish, you can file a formal complaint about the payments." Mrs. Eleanor nodded with a broken voice. "Yes," she said. No more living in fear. Matthew took her hand, his elegant hand over her rough one. It was a contrast that hurt in a beautiful way. "You won't live with fear anymore," he said. The people around them started clapping, shyly at first, then louder. It wasn't for the Teslas, it was for seeing an abuser finally fall. And then, when the noise died down, Matthew leaned toward her as if he were a child again. "Grandma," he said, "we came back." Mrs. Eleanor looked at him as if her heart finally dared to believe. Matthew whispered. Matthew smiled through tears. "Yes, Gabriel." He looked at the second brother. Gabriel nodded. "Yes, Mrs. E. It's Daniel." Daniel swallowed hard, tough on the outside, broken on the inside. "Yes, Grandma." Mrs. Eleanor closed her eyes for a second and let out what she had held in for years. "Thank you. My God." The three of them hugged her carefully, not squeezing, as if they were afraid they might break her. She smelled the expensive cologne, and underneath it, like an echo, she caught the scent of clean soap from that memory. And right there, in the middle of the street, a wound healed. But one last wound remained. Stephen, Mrs. Eleanor's son. Matthew looked at her, serious. "Mrs. E," he said. "Is there something else?" "Something you deserve to know." Eleanor tensed up. "What?" Gabriel took a deep breath. "Years ago, when they were moving us from place to place, a man helped us at a bus station. He gave us bread, told us to look for a lady at a food cart, and gave us your name, Mrs. Eleanor." Mrs. Eleanor lost her breath. "Who was that man?" she whispered. Daniel lowered his voice respectfully. "His name was Stephen." The world stopped for Mrs. Eleanor. "No," she murmured, "my son." Matthew nodded, his eyes wet. "We found him years later," he said. "He was sick. He managed to tell us that you looked for him, that he regretted leaving, and that one day he wanted to come back too." Mrs. Eleanor trembled all over. "Is he alive?" she asked with a hope that hurt. Gabriel looked down. "No, Mrs. E," he said. "But he died knowing that you loved him. And he asked us one thing, that if we ever found you, we tell you the truth and thank you for never stopping being a good person." Eleanor wept. Not a loud, scandalous cry, but a quiet weeping, like rain. And in those tears, the final thread was closed. The uncertainty. Matthew hugged her again. "You didn't lose your life by being good," he said. "You won it. You won us." Days later, Mrs. Eleanor's cart was still on the block, but no longer out of necessity, out of identity. The Triplets didn't whisk her away to a mansion to show her off. They fixed up her small apartment, set up security, renovated her cart, and bought her a cozy, legal kitchen with all the paperwork in order, all without taking away her place. They even added a small community garden nearby, where local kids could learn to grow veggies as a way to honor her kindness and prevent more children from ending up on the streets. Roger faced charges. The inspectors were investigated, and the neighborhood learned something they never learn until they see it. That abuse ends when the victim stops staying silent, and when someone with power decides to use it to protect, not to crush. One afternoon, Mrs. Eleanor served a bowl again. This time, she served it with hands that trembled less. She looked at Matthew, Gabriel, and Daniel sitting on 3 stools, just like years ago. "What do you want to eat?" she asked. And her voice wasn't one of fear anymore. It was the voice of home. Matthew smiled. "Whatever you want, Grandma," he said, and Mrs. Eleanor understood the lesson with a new kind of peace. Sometimes, a shared meal doesn't just fill the stomach. It brings families back. Please comment your impressions and opinions in the comments. I'd be really happy if you left a like, M.